The Loretta Young Show.
You know, one of the most intriguing things to me is the vivid imagination that seems to go with the sensitive and uncluttered mind of a child. Now, there are times when this imagination of theirs leads them into a world all of their own. And right now, I'd like you to meet Gene Vernon. He's going to tell our story tonight. It's about his daughter, his wife, and himself.
Well, young lady, how do you like our new home?
I don't like it, Daddy.
You don't? Well, why not?
Because I hear things.
Hear things? What kinds of things?
Things about Mrs. Bannister.
Oh, who's Mrs. Bannister?
This is Mrs. Bannister.
So you've named your new doll.
Yes.
How do you do, Mrs. Bannister? It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance.
Say, how do you do? I think I'll invite Mrs. Bannister to a tea party in the living room.
Yes, you do that. Seems like there's been a new addition to Pam's collection of make-believe playmates.
So I heard. I was just trying to remember if we've ever known anyone by the name of Mrs. Bannister. It seems such an unlikely name for a child to pick out.
You ought to know by now that your daughter's imagination is capable of almost anything.
Yeah.
Look out, Daddy. You're stepping on Sweetie Pie's tail.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pam.
Poor Sweetie Pie. Did Daddy hurt you? Come here. Sit down.
Sweetie Pie may have been invisible to Ginny and me, but to Pam, he was just as real as the chair she was sitting on. That night, she asked to have the Mrs. Bannister doll in bed with her. And she had one other request.
Will you leave my light on tonight, please?
Honey, I thought you were getting to be such a big girl that you weren't afraid of the dark anymore.
It's only because of Mr. Bannister that I want the light on.
Oh, so there's a Mr. Bannister, too. What's he like?
He's mean, Daddy. Awful, awful, awful mean. I hate him.
Oh, Pam, don't say that word.
Try not to think about Mr. Bannister, Pam. He's not real, you know.
He isn't?
Of course not. Now, you go to sleep and forget all about him.
Okay.
Good night, sweetheart.
Good night.
Mommy will leave a light on for you.
Thanks, Daddy.
Well, shall I be Papa Bear?
Okay.
Good night, sweetie.
Good night.
You know, I guess moving from the old apartment upset her more than I realized.
I wish I could be sure that's all that's bothering her.
What do you mean?
I don't know. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but... Well, the 4 days that we've been here, she seems to have changed somehow.
Hmm?
Yeah, well, you know how active she usually is. Well, now there are hours on end where she just sits out on that terrace, hardly moving. She's... I don't know, she seems sort of listless.
Honey, it's probably just that fertile imagination of hers working overtime.
Well, that's another thing.
What?
Now, always before, these imaginary characters of hers have given her a lot of fun, but not now.
Look, Mrs. Worrybottom.
Yeah?
When I was a kid, I used to dream of Indians that have us tied to the stake. Why, the thing would be so real in my mind that I'd actually feel the flames on my feet.
You would, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe you're right.
I'm always right. It's a sort of a rule of the household.
Well, that isn't the rule that bothers me. It's the exception that proves the rule. What time's your plane leave?
First thing in the morning.
You want me to pack for you?
Oh, no. You did that for me last trip. I never did find out where you hid my socks.
Well, you just didn't look very hard, is all I can say.
This time, I'm going to pack my way.
Yeah, all right, sweetie. all ready, dear?
Mm-hmm. Where's Pam?
Oh, she's out on the terrace.
Be right back.
Yeah. Ooh, that's what I thought.
I'm ready to leave, honey.
Oh, Daddy. I wish you weren't going away, Daddy. I'm scared.
Scared? Why, there's nothing to be scared of.
Isn't there?
Of course not. Daddy'll be home before you know it.
Okay.
You be a good girl.
Okay.
Bye-bye, honey.
There's nothing to be scared of, Mrs. Bannister. It's all right. This is okay.
These trips away from home were an unfortunate but nonetheless essential part of my business, and my wife had grown accustomed to them. Her day passed uneventfully until late in the afternoon.
Pam?
Yeah, Mom?
How's about you and I having dinner out here on the terrace tonight? All alone, just you and I. Huh?
I'd rather not, Mommy.
Oh. Well, where then? In the kitchen?
I don't want to eat at all, Mommy. I'm afraid to eat.
Why, for heaven's sake?
Because of the white powder on the food.
Well, the salt, you mean?
No, not the salt. White powder. Poison powder. Don't you understand?
No, Pam, I don't.
Oh, Mommy.
Come here, honey. Sit up here in my lap and tell me all about it. Now, what about this white powder, huh?
Mrs. Banner ate some of the white powder.
Who did?
Mrs. Bannister.
Yes.
She ate some of the white powder.
Yes.
It made her sick. Awful sick. Oh, Mommy. I don't want Mrs. Bannister to be dead.
Oh, honey, she couldn't be dead. She isn't really alive, you know. Pam, honey, come here. Oh, you do feel like you have a little bit of a fever. You know, I think I might call Dr. Gorson, ask him to come over here and see you after dinner, all right?
I don't feel good, Mommy.
Well, maybe you better hop into bed right now, then, okay?
Okay.
Come on, I'll give you a lift. There you go.
Nothing to worry about, the doctor told my wife.
She has a slight virus.
Pam had a touch of fever, the result of a mild virus infection, and this, no doubt, had stimulated her always active imagination.
She's rather enjoying
Just give her the pills 3 times a day, keep her in bed, and she'd be fine in no time.
All right, thank you. Children are that way, I know.
Yes, they are.
Thanks.
Thank
Good night,
you
Doctor.
very
Thanks
much.
for coming.
Bye.
Well, shall we get this medicine over with right now?
Yes, Mommy.
All right. Just take one of them. That's the girl. Hop then. Down the hatch. My brave girl. Now, how about going right off to sleep, huh?
You leave my light on again?
Sure. There you are.
And you won't go to the party. Leave me all alone.
What party?
The one you're going to be invited to.
Well, honey, I'm not going to be invited to any party.
Yes, you are. And something terrible may happen. So promise you won't go.
Honey.
Promise, please.
All right. I promise.
Thanks, Mom. Now would you bring Mrs. Bannister in here? I left her out on the terrace with my other dolls.
Yeah, all right. You say your prayers while I'm gone, huh?
Okay. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Good night, God.
I didn't mean to startle you. Mrs. Vernon, isn't it?
Yes. Who are you?
Well, my name is Van Zold. I have the adjoining apartment.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. How do you do, Mr. Mazzone?
I didn't mean to creep up on you like that. What I wanted to know, if you mind moving some of your youngsters' toys off the terrace just for tonight.
Oh, certainly I wouldn't mind. I'm afraid I should apologize for Pam monopolizing the place, but, well, you see, she's very young, and she doesn't realize that the terrace is for the tenants of both apartments.
Ordinarily, I wouldn't mind. I doubt if I come out here more than 2-3 times in a year, but tonight I'm having some friends in, and, well,
You don't want them tripping over her doll buggy. Well, I don't blame you.
Well, I'm delighted I have such an understanding neighbor.
It's all right.
Perhaps you and your husband would like to join us later on? That way the party noises won't bother you.
Yeah, I'm not going to be invited to any party.
Yes, you are.
Something wrong, Mrs. Vernon?
No. No, there's nothing wrong. I'm afraid I won't be able to come to your party. You see, my husband's away, and my little girl isn't feeling very well. But thank you, just the same.
Oh, well, that's too bad. Good evening, Mrs. Vernon.
Good evening.
Something terrible may happen.
Somebody better call an ambulance.
It's Barbara.
I better go down. Oh, it's awful. We were standing out here alone, just talking.
Huh?
And she leaned over to look at the view. She hasn't been well lately. I guess she lost her balance.
Who lost her balance?
One of my guests. Her name was Mrs. Bannister. 19 floors to the ground. Poor thing.
Yes, honey, I'm right here.
Oh, no, he's not there.
Well, it's all right, sweetheart. Come on, sit up for a minute. I want to talk to you for a minute. Pam.
Yes, Mommy.
First of all, I want you to tell me all you know about Mrs. Bannister. The real Mrs. Bannister, I mean, not your doll.
Yes, Mommy.
Did you ever see her?
No.
No, but when you were playing out on the terrace, you sometimes heard people in the next apartment talking about her. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Who were the people?
2 men.
Oh, did you ever see them?
No.
Did you ever hear their names?
Yes. One was Mrs. Bannister's husband, Mr. Bannister.
Oh.
And the other had a funny name.
Like Van Zolt?
I think so.
I see. Tell me, did anyone else ever hear these conversations?
Mm-hmm. Sweetie Pie, my dog.
Sweetie Pie.
Yes. He hears everything I hear.
Mm-hmm.
After Pam had gone back to sleep, Ginny put through a call to my hotel in Pittsburgh. But, honey, you know how Pam is. She might have made the whole thing up.
Oh, but dear, she must have heard something. Else why would she have named her doll Mrs. Bannister?
Yeah.
And how does she know I was going to be invited to a party?
Maybe you're right. Maybe they figured it was safer to have you at the party where they could keep an eye on you.
That's what I thought.
They certainly wouldn't want to take a long-shot chance of you accidentally seeing the murder from our own apartment.
What'll I do, Gene? Shall I call the police?
We'll look a fine couple of fools if it turns out to be some more of Pam's make-believe.
Oh, dear, does that matter if there's the slightest possibility that Mrs. Bannister was murdered?
No. Of course not. All right, you call headquarters right away. Meanwhile, I'll rush down to the airport and catch the first train back home.
All right, darling. But hurry up, will you? I'm scared. All right. Yeah. Bye.
It won't be necessary to call the police, Mrs. Vernon.
What do you mean?
I mean that they're here already. This Detective Sergeant Peters, Mrs. Vernon.
Oh.
Not very polite of us to barge in this way, Mrs. Vernon, but Mr. Van Zolt here has been helping me make a routine examination on the terrace, and we couldn't help overhearing your telephone conversation.
Your window was open, you see, just as mine was when your daughter overheard my conversations with Bannister. It was at my suggestion that Sergeant Peters decided to talk to you.
Mr. Van Zolt would like to clear up this embarrassing misunderstanding as quickly as possible. Can't say that I blame him.
Well, no. Won't you sit down?
Thank you. To be brief, Mrs. Vernon, I've satisfied myself that Mr. Van Zolt here had absolutely nothing to do with Mrs. Bannister's death.
Well, how can you be sure, Sergeant?
Oh, police are called in on matters of this kind I don't know how many times a month. After all my years in the department, I'm not apt to be mistaken.
And, Mr. Bannister, what about him? Her husband?
Well, 3 of the other guests are willing to swear that Bannister was inside the apartment at the time of the accident.
Well, Sergeant, what about the conversations that my child overheard? Do you want me to believe that they were all pure imagination?
Mr. Van Zolt and Mr. Bannister are radio actors. They've been going over a script in which a husband tries to poison his wife. When that fails, he hires another man to employ more direct means. Your child just happened to listen in on the rehearsals.
Well, maybe they're just saying that.
No, Mrs. Vernon. I've seen the radio script myself. You can take my word for it. Neither man had anything to do with the accident.
Are you convinced?
Yes, I am convinced, but... Well, right now I feel like such an utter idiot that I don't know what to say. Oh, excuse me, will you please? Our voices must have awakened her.
Certainly.
Yes, Pam, yes. What is it?
I heard you talking to that man with a funny name.
Mr. Van Zolt?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was. And you know something, Van? He turns out to be a very nice man, after all.
And is Mr. Bannister nice, too?
Well, I expect so, though I haven't met him yet.
But you have, Mommy. I heard him talking, too.
Oh, no, honey, you're mistaken. That other man in the living room is Sergeant Peters.
No, he's not, Mommy. His name is Mr. Bannister. I remember his voice.
I think you'd better come back to the living room, Mrs. Vernon.
Is everything all right, Mommy?
Yes, dear. Everything's fine. Come on, you get back into bed now. Keep nice and warm. Lay down.
The real Sergeant Peters left some time ago. We hope to avoid a messy situation by having Bannister here impersonate him.
What do you intend to do?
We'll decide that after your husband gets here. Check with the airport, find out when the next flight's due from Pittsburgh.
Better have a seat, Mrs. Vernon. Looks like we have a long night ahead of us.
Van Zolt was right. It turned out to be the longest night of my wife's life. Her only chance was to play along in the hope that something would go wrong with their plans.
Van. Keep an eye on her. I'm going to take a nap.
The earliest scheduled flight from Pittsburgh wouldn't get me home until about 6 in the morning. So the endless minutes dragged on.
Get back there, Mrs. Vernon. Go on. Come on. Sit down. Don't do that.
Who'd be calling you at this hour of the night?
I'd advise you to try no more nonsense, Mrs. Vernon.
No, remember your child's in the next room.
You wouldn't hurt her.
That depends on you. You understand?
Plane landed ahead of schedule.
Yeah. You don't want your child harmed, so behave.
Jenny, I'm home. Jenny, I'm past the chain. I'm locked out. Jenny. Oh, there you are.
All right, drop your guns, or so help me, I'll kill her right before your eyes.
Please do as they say.
Of course.
Back up a little. Come on. Now then, how'd you know we were here?
I was in such a hurry to get home, I didn't wait for the scheduled flight. I chartered a plane. When I got to the airport, I phoned my wife. When she didn't answer, I figured something was wrong, so I phoned police headquarters.
I see. Very clever of you. Now, I'm going out that door. I don't want anyone so much as blinking an eye. You get that? I'm taking Mrs. Vernon with me as a guarantee of your good behavior.
You think we're going to stand by?
Please, Gene, please don't. Don't take any chance.
You're being very sensible, Mrs. Vernon. All right, you stay where you are.
You all right?
I'm all right. Oh, there's Pam. I better go into her.
All right, come on. On your feet.
Mommy!
Yes, Pam. Yes, I'm here, dear.
What's all the noise out there, Mommy?
There's nothing, honey. Everything's all right now. Now, you go back to sleep like a good little girl, huh?
Well, all I can say is the world looks a lot rosier than it did a moment ago.
Thanks, Sergeant. Pam, okay?
Yes. Yes, she's fine.
Look what Bannister tripped over.
What? That's Pam's Mrs. Bannister.
You might say that he tripped over Mrs. Bannister.
Oh, Gene.
Oh.
Familiar with this? Little pitchers have big ears, which often lead us into tears. They also pick up words with ease and utter them again as God shall please. Well, good night. See you next week.
Visit Loretta Young again next week. Same time, same station.